this is just the beginning.
Good afternoon. I'm Margaret Talev, the White House and Politics Editor for Axios, and I'm talking with you from my home in Washington, D.C. Welcome to our live stream audiences from Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course on the Axios website. And welcome to the Gen Z and Future of Politics virtual event at the DNC. Today we're going to be talking about how Gen Z engages with politics. We'll unpack the changing world of youth leadership in politics and discuss the unique position of Gen Z in shaping future trends. I'd like to thank our partners with Apple Original Films and A24 for this event. And of course, we encourage you to join the conversation using hashtag Axios Events and @Axios on Twitter. And for the latest news, please follow our dashboard at axios.com. Our next guest is Rene Otero. He was a participant in the 2018 Texas Boys State, and of course, one of the main characters in the recently released Boys State documentary. I know later in the program we'll be talking with the filmmakers, but now I'd just like to welcome Rene Otero, joining us live from Austin, Texas. Hey, Rene, how are you?
Hey, Margaret, how are you doing? I'm doing good.
Well, I'm doing terrific. Thanks so much. As I introduce you to the audience, I'd like to start by reading you a passage to our audience about you from the latest New Yorker, if that's okay.
Please.
As smart and slender as a whip, Rene has so judicious a manner and such command as an orator that he might as well just skip these childish political games and head straight for the real thing. He even has a pair of little spectacles like half moons over which he examines a crowded chamber with a mildly inquiring disdain. Why wait 4 decades till Rene's put on 50 pounds, moved to Georgetown, used up a couple marriages, and somehow mislaid his hair, sense of humor, and his aura of charismatic? Give the guy a Senate committee to chair now. So no pressure, but you might be a household name to rising youth politicians of all stripes in the to come. And for those who haven't seen this film yet,
paragraph.
Yes. Here's what I want to talk about with you in terms of Gen Z and the future of politics. In this experience, which I got to see in this amazing documentary, you were leading a group of boys that in some cases were really different from you. They were whiter, to be sure. They were more conservative, to be sure. Many are anti-gun control. But they also talked about seceding and even talked about impeaching you. And after handling a lot of these really complicated situations with finesse, I just want to ask you to start how your experience in Boys State changed your understanding of the complexities of how politics actually works.
So coming into Boys State, I wanted to be in politics. I wanted to be a senator. That was my cure-all plan for the future, just vague plan. And I was doing debate for years also prior, so I had a lot of knowledge and experience when it comes to the policy making process, policy reading. And so me going into Boys State, I thought I kind of had an understanding of what American politics, the electoral cycle was like. But, they added such a human and immersive element by actually, applying the things that I knew. So, I think coming into Boys State, I ultimately have changed those views. I think I still want to engage with politics, just not as a politician.
Do you feel like politicians can get things done? That's a personal choice, to be sure. But do you think that any politicians could get anything done, or are you more cynical now about the process?
I will say I'm cynical. But I'm going to say, before anyone gets on my cynicism and anything I say next, cynicism is a form of love. Love requires accountability. I will say that the way that politics are looking now, the way we literally had the government shut down twice over the budget. So I doubt that an individual politician would be able to make the necessary change, considering the way that Congress is set up and gridlock just dilutes their power. That being said, I will say that there's a responsibility of the public, however, to continue to engage civically, because I feel like we have this really unfair, perception that it's supposed to be the politician who saves us, while we sit on the sidelines.
You mean that individual members of the public have a greater responsibility to civic life and the future of the country?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like they're put on these pedestals, and therefore they are kind of like ceremonial figures. It is through our current politicians that we learn our conduct, that we learn, the way politics should function. And you see that within the documentary. You see some tricks that were played out in the actual real world. So, like the individual politician has the responsibility to be a beacon of decency. And also a delegate to the people.
But individual voters, including young voters, have a responsibility to participate too. It sounds like you're saying it's like it's a really hard year because for young voters, for first-time voters, a lot of times seeing a candidate on the stump, particularly a presidential candidate, might be what gets them excited about politics. The speeches, the rallies, some of that engagement, even if they're not there in person, to watch politicians in a mass audience. And we're not going to see any of that this year. And because of coronavirus, some people may not feel comfortable going to the polls on election day either. Like, how do you think about these issues like engagement or absentee voting, but engagement in general in a year when the coronavirus has made it harder to physically show up somewhere and be part of something?
I will say that, coronavirus, of course, is increasing the need for engagement. Additionally, I will say that it is kind of disconcerting that, something that we consider to be so foundational to American values as voting didn't already have a fail-safe in place for just in case people couldn't get to the polls. I think it is a failure on the American public's part to not make voting essentially universal. And I think that's what's playing out, especially now. This is going to be a hard election to get high voter turnout, and I absolutely understand that. I think it's maybe this is the numbers that are necessary to create the effective change to ensure that everyone can vote.
You think there will be turnout with young voters this election year?
It's honestly it's all up in the air for me, really, because I've engaged on social media. I'm seeing the way that the youth are speaking about both candidates. I've seen people arguing that not voting at all is their best course of action, and this is kind of reminiscent of the 2016 election. I don't think that this election is going to have the turnout that we expect it does if we don't make the effort, the active effort to ensure that those in isolated communities can vote.
It sounds like you're making that effort. What are you up to these days?
Specifically for my community, I've been engaging with some research with the Center for Studies on Race and Democracy. So we look at things, of course, like voting and policy and the intersection with race. And I think that's very timely considering, the way that we are discussing white supremacy in this country on a whole new politicized scale. So I think it's really fitting that I work with them to research and create reports that kind of reveal the conditions of, housing discrimination, voting, and policy within the Austin area.
I'm sure some of these were issues you were thinking about before, but after the Boys State experience, how would you say that your priorities have changed in terms of what issues you are the most interested in pursuing and advocating for?
For sure. I remember before we went to Boys State, we were all required to fill out this survey. And then when we got to Boys State, they had this big screen where they showed the results of the survey. And it was which policies were most important to the people of the camp. Almost everyone was on guns. And then race relations was at the bottom. And so, someone who's, of course, been engaged with race because I'm a racialized body, I've always been interested in race relations and civil rights. But then going into that space and understanding how bit of a taboo it seems to discuss these things, or how unimportant it seems to people who it doesn't directly affect, has caused me to want to double down. And I'm actually looking to engage more in education per se, because I think that is a really great step to sensitize people to the issues that face this country.
Rene Otero, I know we're going to be hearing a lot more from you in the months and years to come. I really want to thank you for joining us today here at Axios.
Thank you so much for having me.
And up next, we have a View from the Top interview with Axios CEO Jim VandeHei and the Boise State filmmakers.
Thank you very much, Margaret. It's now my pleasure to bring you a conversation with Jesse Moss and Amanda McBain, the co-directors of Boise State, an Apple's original and A24 production. Great to have a conversation with the two of you. I have the pleasure of working on our HBO show, so we do a lot of documentary work ourselves. I'm fascinated by what you do. If you could just start off by, how did you get the idea? I always love the germ of finding out, like, what can you do a documentary about? What can you get access to that you can bring to life?
Yeah, well, it started with two things. One was a big question about the state of polarization in America, the divisiveness that we found ourselves in after the Trump election of 2016, and just trying to understand that as citizens, not even so much as filmmakers. It wasn't until we read about the Texas Boys State program in 2017 that we realized there's a really unusual space that they've created where young people with very different politics are actually getting together and trying to talk to each other. So when we saw that there was this potentially valuable, playful prism to look at these questions of politics and how young people are kind of taking on their own roles in our democracy, we thought there was a potential film there.
You did a brilliant job of narrowing the lens, right, on this small group of boys that sort of say so much about so many different aspects of politics and sort of being young in this crazy environment today. How did you get access? Like, was it hard to get people to give you the access that you had and to be as sincere and authentic as they were throughout the entire production?
It's a great question. That's one of the great questions of documentary filmmaking. And in normal circumstances, we would have years to develop relationships and develop stories and follow life as it unfolds. In this instance, the sort of madness of this film, or not madness, but the insanity of it, is that we first had to make a phone call with the Texas Boys State leadership and be in conversation with them about the kind of immersive filmmaking we wanted to do about their program. And then we needed to find the four folks that we were going to really embed with through the event itself. And whittling that 1,100 down to 4 was one of the great challenges and one of the most important challenges of making this particular movie. We needed a diversity of kids. We needed them to have different backgrounds, different life experiences, but also, most importantly, different politics, so that because we wanted to see that conversation unfold in the event itself. And it took 3 months. We crisscrossed Texas. We met many, many, many interesting people. But when we found each one of them, there was an instant moment of recognition. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what irrational thing it is. But there you are, and we need you in our movie.
Was there one character who stood out, who you felt like you learned the most from, or you're most surprised by? Because there's so many arresting backgrounds, right? They come from such different worlds and then act in such radically different ways. Anyone who stood out to you that is someone who sort of stick in your mind long after the film is gone?
I think the hero of our movie is Steven Garza. He comes in from Houston. He's a young man of Mexican descent. He's got an undocumented mother. He's got very progressive politics, and he's coming into a program that is predominantly white and conservative, and he's got to try to navigate the space. And what we discovered in Steven, we knew that he was smart, that he had some political sophistication, but we had no idea that he could possibly do well. And that's the great story that unfolded in front of us. The way that he rises to this occasion, he's a young man of great integrity, but he also summons the better angels of this rabble of Texas teenage boyhood and kind of calls them. And that was the great surprise of the film. And I think he becomes, in that journey, kind of our heart. And we got tremendously invested in his story. It really moved us in so many ways.
He really was our North Star. And I think to be reminded of that, that kind of leadership and the power that it holds and that it can summon others to itself is something extraordinary that I came away from this film with.
I thought you guys pulled off a sort of a documentary coup in terms of you're always setting out, you want to illuminate, you either want to teach or inspire. right? And I think you're able to pull that off with this film. What did you learn specifically about politics or sort of the nature of people in the arena that you didn't know when you got into this project?
I think there were wonderful small and big lessons about politics and the state of our democracy in the experience of making this film. I think of one particular moment where Stephen, our heroic character, is asked by a young man, what's the purpose of a politician? And he says, to serve others and not yourself. It's a very simple answer, but it's very profound too, and something I think we can all remind ourselves of when we think about the roles of our elected officials. And I think on a big level, it was to recognize that there is a desire, even in our hyperpolarized country, to work together, to find common ground. And in a place like Texas, where you imagined it wouldn't be possible, even on the issue of guns, adults can't agree on it. At Texas Boy State, they could agree to pass a universal background check bill. I think that willingness on the part of all of them to find consensus was a hopeful lesson on the potential of our politics as a country.
And Amanda, was there anything that stood out to you that surprised you about the nature of politics when you have to spend so much time with the camera lens trained on it?
I mean, I think the program and then the film that we made about the program is a little bit of a focus on how challenging electoral politics really are. And so it's not just who we elect that matters, but it's how we elect that matters. And what's been fascinating surprise to me is Ben's kind of reflection on his experience through that program is now understanding 2 years older, that he's now 2 years older, and also the country is 2 years further into this kind of divided space that we're in, that kind of win at all cost kind of tactics, just you may get elected, but then you have a country that is a little more divided once you get there. Then what happens? So I think he understands the fragility of democracy and has sort of questioned his own win it all.
Well, you have to have a conscience to feel that way, and I think Ben's reflection is really reflective of the thought that he's given his actions, and that's been really great to see.
And this event is about sort of the trends of Gen Z and people younger and just sort of getting into politics. Amanda, you mentioned that this is as much an exploration of young people as it is about politics, happens to be shown through a political lens. What is your takeaway about this next generation? Was there anything that you saw, that you felt in making this film that sort of gave you a new lens into Gen Z that we should all be thinking about?
I don't think that they're as easily put into boxes as we think they are. Certainly politically, there was a lot of sort of self-described libertarians who had kind of a la carte politics. That surprised me going into what I understood to be a very conservative majority. So I think also they're very activated and much more engaged than I certainly was when I was going through high school. And that's partly because they're inheriting, a world that has some existential threats to it: climate change, gun violence, this, that, and the other thing. Now the pandemic. They're shouldering a lot, and they are also seeing some forms of abdication in the adult state that they are going to inherit. And I think that activation and that engagement. I mean, I sort of feel, in at least the anecdotal evidence of our four guys, I feel very encouraged by them taking over, frankly. There's also...
Well, what we also saw is a real contest of masculine identity being played out. We didn't fully realize what a window we would have into boyhood in America in 2018. And you see on view two kinds of ways of being a man. You see a kind of empathic listening, a compassion embodied in Stephen. You see on the part of Ben, his opponent, a kind of militant strength. And I think it's both a way to be a man and a way to be a politician. And we recognize that on a national level, and to see them try to work it out. And in fact, we have one young man who's sort of in conflict with himself about the right way to conduct his campaign. Is it to be the sensitive soul or the man of strength? And that was kind of a wonderful revelation as he kind of walks us through that moral wrestling match that he's going through.
and Ben has a little Trump in him, and Stephen, given sort of his background, really captures Texas. Like that's the other thing about the film, the fact you're able to shoot it in Texas, a state that is changing before our eyes, a state whose politics are very much influenced by the increased diversity in the state, and you feel that unfold in the film. So Jesse and Amanda, thank you for fascinating conversations. Congratulations on a great, great film. People should watch it. You'll learn a lot about politics, a lot about humanity. And back to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Jim. Our next guest is representative of Texas's 23rd Congressional District, Congressman Will Hurd, joining us live from San Antonio, Texas. Congressman Hurd, it's great to be with you.
It's always a pleasure to be on. This should be a fun conversation.
Well, let's start here. Congressman Hurd, you're a former CAA officer. You've served in Congress since 2015. You've been the only Black Republican in the House, and you represent a more than 2/3 Latino district. You decided to leave Congress rather than run again in November. I'm curious, for our younger listeners interested in entering politics, what is your message to Gen Z Americans who want to make a difference? Is Congress the place where anything can get done right now? Should you bother running for office, or can you get more done outside of elected office?
Margaret, a great question. And I think it's in all the above, right? So I've been able to be effective as a Black Republican in a Latino district. I've had about 16 pieces of legislation signed into law. That's under a Democratic president, a Republican president, a Democratic speaker, a Republican speaker. It's not easy, and our system was designed not to be easy. But I'm proud of my legislative success, and I'm proud that I've tried to be someone that's known as someone who's willing to solve problems, and I'll work with anybody in order to do that. So yes, I would tell people that young folks get involved, right? Being in Congress, being in elected office should be something you should aspire to. But I also want to tell my colleagues, my peers, that we should behave and model the behavior that we want to see the young folks do when they get into office, right? I want kids when they're 10, 11 years old being like, I want to be a police officer, I want to be a fireman, I want to be an astronaut, but I also want to be a member of Congress. But right now, our job approval as Congress as a whole is not very good, and we should be thinking about this as we move forward. But the other piece of advice I would give young folks is go out and have a career before you get in politics. The reason I've been able to be effective is that I've had a decade in national security, in cybersecurity, and so I was able to take that experience and bring it to Congress. And that's why a lot of my legislation that I've passed has been on national security. And so I've been able to be even more effective in a shorter period of time than most. And by the way, that my legislative record is better than a lot of people that served for 30 years. And so it's because I had an expertise and I brought that to Congress. And so that's something that I would advocate for. And then for me leaving, there's many ways to serve your country. And I would like these young folks to go serve in the State Department, in the CIA, in the Peace Corps, have some of that experience, and then bring that back to their government. So my short answer is all the above. They should do it all. And after watching the movie, I'm excited. And one of the things I've seen crisscrossing my district, and I talked to as many high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools as I can. I've been trying to hit them all. People are always saying they're worried about the future of the country. I'm not, because I see these young kids that care more about things. When I was in high school, I was more interested in just playing basketball, running the streets with my buddies, watching the latest movie that came out, playing video games. But some of these kids that I've met are trying to have an impact on their community right now while they're in school. So that's exciting for me.
You turned 43 this week, the ripe old age. You're young for a member of Congress, old considering the people we're talking to today. You're actually a very young Gen Xer. We're talking to Gen Z. These are people in their 20s now. I try to imagine being in my 20s and watching the pandemic, this once-in-a-century moment, and Congress's response to it, the White House's response to it, our national elected leadership's response. It seems that we have a conflict between science and politics. It seems that our partisan conflicts have met at an impasse, so that after that first round of stimulus, now it's like everything in the kitchen sink. The Postal Service, are you going to be able to vote? Why can't we get testing? Like, do you see this as a moment of national shame? Do you see it as an opportunity? How should we interpret like the very turbulent and frustrating times that we're in right now?
Well, I think the way we get out of this is we follow the lead and the lesson. I think his name was Stephen, who was running for governor in the Boys State movie. And he talked about he wanted to go and listen to people. He wanted to hear their concerns. He wanted to appeal to everyone. And that's that's the message. That's something I've tried to do since I've been in Congress. And the reason I've been able to be effective, and I think is a model for others, is I represent everybody in my district, not just the people that voted for me. And so I think when we really focus on the issues that people care about, that's putting food on their table, a roof over their head, and making sure the people that are healthy and happy, people that they love are healthy and happy, then that's going to resonate with folks. And people want to see us getting things done and solving problems. And unfortunately, there are those on both sides of the political aisle that believe that contrast is the only way to ultimately win elections. And that has been successful in the past. But in my opinion, you solve a problem, tell you what you did and why you did it. That leads to electoral success. Back in the day, there used to be a saying that good policy is good politics, right? I think sometimes that's been flipped right now. And so I think we can use this time and this craziness that we're all going through to say, hey, we demand people to solve problems. And you got to solve problems at the local level, the state level, and the federal level together. So I think this is an opportunity for us, but we need folks that have the willingness to make hard choices, because guess what? It's not easy getting attacked from both sides. It's not easy trying to show a middle way, but it's doable. And in the end, people care about results. And that's what I found. That's why people are frustrated right now, is because they're not seeing it. The first 3 care packages, why did they work? Because we negotiated them at the beginning in a bipartisan, bicameral way. When you do that, the only way we get big things done in this country is by doing it together. And the first 3 packages was an example.
The buck stops at the top. You have expressed some frustrations with President Trump, but you're a Republican and he is the president and a Republican. I know you have been thinking hard about how you'll vote yourself in November. Have you made a decision, and are you willing to share your thinking with us?
As I've always said, I'm disappointed with both choices, and I've disagreed. When I disagree, and I agree when I agree. What I want is someone who's going to come in here and show that the way you solve problems is by empowering people and not empowering the government. I want someone who recognizes that the way we achieve peace is by working with our friends and being nice with nice guys and tough with tough guys. I want someone who recognizes and understands the way that you help people up the economic ladder is by making sure that we're talking about free markets, not socialism. So these are the things that I'm looking forward in this upcoming election. These are the things that people are frustrated with. I want to make sure we have 2 strong parties. I'm proud to be a Republican, and making sure that we grow the party to people that haven't been, haven't even met a Republican. When I first came into office, people were like, I've never met a Republican. And so for me, that's what my goal is. That's what I want someone to ultimately to do.
We're almost out of time. One last question, but it's an important one. What are you doing next? Are you running for political office, and when? What happens after November?
Well, my goal after November is I'm going to stay at the intersection of national security, technology, and public policy. I'll be doing that in media and talking about that. I'll be helping, some high-speed, low-drag companies to be able to do that. If the opportunity comes, someday to lace up the shoes again, I'll evaluate. If I'm able to help my country, I always will. But I'm looking forward to making an impact a different way.
Congressman Hurd, please stay in touch with us. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And our next guest is another Texan, Beto O'Rourke, former punk rock bandman, congressman, presidential candidate, and the founder of the Powered by People PAC, joining us live from El Paso. Hello, Beto.
Good to be with you.
Well, thanks so much for making a little bit of time for us. I know you're busy because you launched Powered by People last December. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the group's been doing? And since we're talking with Gen Z voters and Gen Z Americans today, how much what you're doing relies on engaging younger people?
There are a host of extraordinary opportunities in Texas right now when we look at the November 2020 election. We have a chance for the first time in 20 years to gain Democratic control of the state house. And as you know, the state house after the 2020 census will be tasked with redrawing the political districts for state house seats or congressional seats throughout the state of Texas. And as you probably also know, that power has been used to disenfranchise Black voters and Latino voters for more than 100 years. In fact, Texas, until recently, ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout because of the racial gerrymandering, the voter ID laws, the polling place closures, the voter suppression tactics that have long been the hallmark of the kind of democracy that you see here in Texas. With a Democratic majority, we can begin to draw people back in to their democracy, draw them back into a reason to vote, and really have a fully functioning democracy in Texas. The second big opportunity is for Texas, for the first time in 44 years, to award our electoral college votes to the Democratic nominee for president. Jimmy Carter in 1976 was the last Democratic nominee to be able to do that. And I strongly believe that if Texas does this, the impact on American politics will be seismic. It will once and for all end the Trump presidency and Trumpism in America, and it will allow America to start the necessary next chapter for our country. Texas holds the power to do that. And to the last part of your question, young people are going to be in the vanguard of this. We saw in 2018, where I came very close to defeating Ted Cruz and won more votes than any Democrat had ever won, young people led the day. A young voter turnout was up 500% in early voting in Texas over the last midterm election. And then you name an issue, whether it is reproductive choice, climate change, access to health care, fighting back against this pandemic, young people are on the front lines forcing the conversations and the necessary change that needs to follow. So both at the ballot box and then in terms of organizing to hold elected leaders accountable, we are counting on young people right now.
Do you think that the Biden campaign really understands what the opportunity is or really believes that it's as close as you do? Do you see them doing enough to court Texas in this convention and in the campaign?
No, but that's nothing new. Texas has really been on its own. I mentioned it's been 44 years since Texas last voted for the Democratic nominee for president. And we've been pretty much left to our own devices for the majority of that time. But there's been an extraordinary self-reliant movement here in Texas, born of Texans, run by Texans, with Texans volunteering to reach out to their fellow Texans, be they 17 years old, soon to turn 18 before the November election, or be they 98 years old. And this might be the last election they vote in. All of us are reaching out to our fellow Texans right now and bringing them into play. Our organization, for example, Powered by People, has made more than 2.5 million phone calls, not robocalls, not pre-recorded messages, Texans calling Texans, inviting them into the most important election of our lifetimes. We've also been working to register eligible Texans to vote, and we've registered 77,000 of them so far ahead of this election, most of them likely Democratic voters that we've helped to register. So I feel really good about what Texas is doing, and whether or not the DNC or the Biden campaign fully invest, commensurate with the opportunity that Texas represents, Texans will, I believe, carry the day. We're going to invest our time. We're going to invest what resources we have to make sure that we meet this moment. So I feel really good about Texas right now.
I think when we talk, and we've been talking for years about at which cycle is there going to be a tipping point, at which cycle might Texas flip to Democratic. And we've talked about it largely in terms of demographic trends, the Latino population in Texas. I'm wondering, is that what you think is going to make the difference, or do you think it's the coronavirus? Do you believe that the pandemic will make it more or less likely for that flip to be possible? It's an issue that has a lot of people engaged, and at the same time, it's leading to hardship on the economic front, and it's created concern about being able to turn out in person to vote. So which way do you anticipate it's going to cut?
I think you need to look at where Texas was already going. So in 2018, I came within 2.5 points of Cruz, but we also helped to elect 2 new Democrats to Congress, both replacing long-serving Republicans, 12 new Democrats to the state House, leaving us with a deficit of only 9. And in those 9 districts we have to pick up, we actually won more votes than Ted Cruz, so we know it's possible. 17 African-American judges, all elected in Harris County, all of them women, in 2018. So this state is moving in the right direction, direction very quickly. And then you have the extraordinary failure of leadership in Texas in the midst of this pandemic that has cost more than 10,000 of my fellow Texans their lives. And as we all know, this is not affecting all of us equally. It is disproportionately impacting and, in fact, decimating the Latino population in Texas. You look at the Rio Grande Valley, Cameron County, Hidalgo County, Starr County. Those are 90 to 95% Mexican-American counties. They have run out of space in the morgues, in funeral homes. They are stacking the dead bodies in refrigerated trucks right now. This failure of leadership of epic monumental proportions is not lost on the electorate of Texas. And given the fact that we still have to contend with COVID after November 3rd, it's very much going to be on voters' minds. They're looking for competence, and those elected leaders will prioritize saving lives over politics, something that we desperately need in Texas right now.
For all the movement and population growth in Texas, there still are an awful lot of ideological conservatives in Texas also, and they feel every bit as much of a rock rib Texan as you do. And that all goes to the question of polarization, which, as we know, has really gripped Congress right now. If you're talking to people in their 20s right now, are you advising them to run for national office, or is it honestly as awful as it seems like it is? And do you think you can have a bigger impact at the state and local level or in nonprofit work than in Congress right now?
Yeah, I think those are all false choices. There are a million different ways to serve, and all of them are necessary. I mean, right now I'm serving in a volunteer capacity, calling voters all across the state of Texas to make sure that they are ready to turn out ahead of the most important election of our lifetimes. There are people who are running for office, first-time candidates. An extraordinary number of them, by the way, state house candidates are women, women of color, and black women right now in a state that has long been known for the racial suppression here of voters in Texas. And wouldn't that be wonderful if one of the most diverse states in the country, that boasts the most diverse city in the country, Houston, Texas, what if we were able to elect a majority in our state legislature that actually looked like this state? So very necessary for those candidates to be running, and especially for those first-time candidates. I'm just inspired by their courage. And then it looks like we're going to pick up a number of U.S. congressional seats as well. Again, some of these are first-time candidates who are running. We wouldn't be able to win if they wouldn't put themselves out there. So is politics tough? Yeah. But so is driving a truck. So is being a school teacher. So is being a frontline nurse right now. They're all tough, necessary jobs, and we need people to step up and do them.
We're out of time. As we go, I want to ask you one more question, because there's been so much controversy over the post office and what it'll mean for getting your vote in on time. For a first-time voter who you are advising, how are you advising them to vote, and what are you advising them to do? No, I don't mean how to check the ballot. I don't mean who to vote for. I mean how to vote.
Yeah. Well, look, in Texas, inexplicably, given that we have the deadliest pandemic since 1918, most of us are not allowed to vote by mail. So for those who are 65 years and over, make sure you request that ballot. And as soon as it comes in, fill it out and turn it right around so that there's no question that we'll get there on time. For everyone else, make sure that you vote in early voting. Do not wait until Election Day. Early voting, if there are any lines at all, they will be much shorter. It's very convenient. In most counties, you can vote at any early voting location. So it's close to work, close to home, close to school, easier for you to get it done. But by all means, you've got to vote because you do not want to look back on this election and this moment and wonder what if. Let's make sure that we leave it all in the field, do all that we can while we still can.
Beto O'Rourke, thanks so much for bringing us up to speed on what you're up to and spending the time with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that I hope has made everyone smarter and faster. Hope you'll come back every day this week and next week to take part in our Axios virtual events during both conventions. And if you liked today's conversation and you'd like to sign up for more Axios content, please check out all of our newsletters at signup.axios.com. I'd like, as we say goodbye, to thank our partners at Apple Original Films and A24 for sponsoring today's event. And if you are a podcast listener, we hope you'll check out our two podcasts, Axios Today and Axios Recap, wherever you download your podcasts. That concludes this program. Please stay safe, and we'll see you soon.